There's just so much.
You're listening to a Mamma Mia podcast.
Mamma Mia acknowledges the traditional owners of land and waters that this podcast is recorded on.
Welcome to the best of 2020, where we're bringing you some of our favourite episodes of true crime conversations from the past year. Today's episode is my interview with former Detective Gary Jubelin about the case that cost him his job. It's July 2018 when Detective Gary Jubelin stands in front of microphones and news cameras and says the words, "I suggest you come to us before we come to you." He is addressing the person who knows what happened to 3-year-old William Tyrrell on September 12, 2014. It was just before 10:30am when William's foster mother and foster grandmother were watching him play in his Spider-Man suit, imitating a tiger before running down the side of the house. Then there was silence. Another noise, maybe a scream. Something wasn't right. William's foster mum began calling out, then searching the yard and inside the house for the little boy. 6 years later, there's still no sign of him. In 2018, Jubelin takes over the case. There's no doubt he's the man to do it. He's the most notorious detective in the country, known for leading the investigation into the deaths of 3 Aboriginal children in Bowraville, recovering the body of Matthew Leveson, and running the crime scene following the Lindt Cafe siege. He thinks that if you had lost a 3-year-old, you'd want a detective who would stop at just about nothing to ensure you found out what happened to him. Throughout Detective Jubelin's career, his focus has cost him friendships and relationships, and, in the case of William Tyrrell, it will cost him his job. We have not given up on this investigation. We are committed to finding out what happened to William, he says at the press conference. And he is committed. So much so, he'll end up in a place he's been several times before, a courtroom. Only this time, it's him who will be on trial. I'm Jessie Stephens, and this is True Crime Conversations, a Mamma Mia podcast exploring the world's most notorious crimes by speaking to the people who know the most about them. In this episode, I'm speaking with Gary Jubelin. Gary is one of Australia's most notable homicide detectives. In his new book, I Catch Killers: The Life and Many Deaths of a Homicide Detective, Gary shares the reality of working on investigations such as the disappearance of William Tyrrell and the toll his work has taken on his personal life. He is also known for his work on the case of Andrew Parrish, which saw him portrayed in one of Australia's most acclaimed true crime drama series, Underbelly Badness. Let's start with your dad and your memories of him growing up. What kind of man was your dad?
Look, my dad was, I think, it's the father that I expected to have. He was tough. He was a disciplinarian of the house. I was scared of him, but I loved him. Like there was no, it wasn't an irrational fear of him. He disciplined me, and when I look back at how I could have gone, I'm quite glad he was hard on me, because there were those sliding door moments in life that I think without a father like Kevin was to me, it could have gone wrong.
Do you think he influenced your decision to become a policeman?
No, I don't think he played a part in that. That was I didn't even know I was going to become a policeman. I was more rebellious. I didn't think I would be a cop. It never actually entered my mind. I considered joining the army, but not policing. That was something that wasn't really at the forefront of my thinking.
And what did make you want to become a policeman? What was kind of a moment that you thought, oh, this is something that could interest me?
Well, I'd like to say it was to do good for society or some noble reason, but I was actually a particularly hot day sitting having lunch in a parking ride. I had been working on a building site, and I saw a couple of uniformed cops chasing a bad guy down the street, and I thought how much fun that looked like, and I literally applied the next day to join the police. So that's how I found myself in that career.
Did you have much expectations? Did you know what you were getting into, and what did you imagine that being a policeman even looked like?
I had a fairly open mind to it. I thought it would give purpose and structure to my life. I was more laid back. I suppose it was a way of saying that I sort of rebelled against discipline. I wasn't, outrageously bad, but I didn't really look at the police force as something that I wanted to do. I saw myself more of a leaning towards a hippie rather than the policeman. But when I got there, I liked physical challenges. I liked the physicality of policing, and that was something that attracted me to it. I didn't realise the psychology of policing came into it, so I just went there with an open mind, and it was a non-stop adventure from the day I walked into the police academy.
And you write in the book that in those early years of being a policeman, you were confronted with death more so than you could have expected. And I think a lot of people might not realise that about policing, how often you do find yourself in these enormously traumatic moments. Does that change you, seeing scenes that the ordinary person would never come across?
It does. It's something that you are shielded from, or most people are shielded from, so it sort of hits you in the face when you see it. And quite often policing and death, it's violence or tragic accidents that you're dealing with. And it's sort of, I suppose it made me grow up, but when I'm speaking on behalf of police. Like this, my book is my story, and every other police officer has a similar type of story. So the first dead body you see, you get desensitised to it to a degree, but in my case, not to the point that you stop caring. It wasn't, you couldn't be flippant about it. There was a way of dealing with the death that you saw, but it sort of hit you in the face first up. And the police, they took us all I think it was the first week when you're stationed in general duties, they take you down to the morgue. And so they really throw you in the deep end, so you learn how to deal with death that you will see.
And in those early years, how did you deal with it? So you come home from work and you've seen something that, the person you're living with can't comprehend. How do you process those sorts of images and those scenes?
I think it changes your perspective on life, and it probably brings you into the culture of the police culture or emergency services, army, that type of thing. You join the police. It's not like you don't join to become a bank teller. You join the police. It's a I don't want to say club because that's the wrong connotation, but it's an organisation that you become part of. And I found that I still had friends and outside of the police, and I think that's very important because that keeps you very balanced, to have mates or friends, family that can keep you in check. But you do rely on police, and that's where, after a tough shift, we might go for a drink and talk about what we've seen and process it that way. But everyone processes things differently. Some people have mechanisms on the way of dealing with it. I found solace in training. That sort of took me away from it. But in saying that, I also had a drink sometimes after a tough gig.
You joined the stick-ups, is what they're referred to in the book, who are sort of a police squad. What was their role during that time?
That was in the early 90s that I went to the Armed Hold-Up Squad. People, it might seem foreign now, but there were bank robberies, and there were armed hold-up crews, and when I say crews, not police, bad guys, doing stick-ups. And stick-ups were basically robbing armour guard vans or going into banks and sometimes actually shooting people in the bank and taking off with the money. It was a very violent crime. They were violent times, and there were some really good crews operating in the 80s and 90s. So in the Armed Hold-Up Squad, their focus was to bring down the bad guys. And when I say bad guys, not the local corner store that was held up by someone carrying a knife. It was the organised groups doing armed robberies on banks.
And there were some pretty unconventional strategies used when it came to interviewing or when it came to trying to get confessions out of people. What were some of those strategies that you saw while you were there?
Look, there was criticism that came from major crime. In New South Wales, we had the Royal Commission. I know Queensland had the Fitzgerald inquiry. I think you could name any police force and they've all gone through that. In the days that I was there were confessions that weren't recorded. where that was accepted at court. So there was a lot of criticism. There was a lot of allegations made against police. As the Royal Commission showed, some allegations were warranted because there was a certain group of people that had crossed the line. But they were doing a difficult job, and I'm by no means defending corrupt behaviour. And it was good that the Royal Commission came through New South Wales. I can't speak for other states. But it changed the culture, and the culture needed to be changed. But in saying that, and this is something that I've been pretty strong about throughout my career, the pendulum swung so far that detectives were looked at all being corrupt. And we were so far from it wasn't funny. And I think the pendulum swung too far, that there was a lineage of training from experienced detectives that may have been caught up in the Royal Commission or left because of the Royal Commission. And I think that lineage was almost broken. And I count myself fortunate as one of the detectives that got to work major crime before, during and after the Royal Commission.
And the Royal Commission, I think, you'd been working for maybe 10 years as a policeman when that came along. Were you worried at all? Because as you say, there's a culture in policing and there might have been things that were considered unconventional. And as you say as well, the pendulum was swinging pretty far the other way, that things people were being accused of were also things a lot of people had seen and had become quite commonplace. Were you worried that you would be called up and that people would ask you questions about things you'd witnessed or things you'd even done?
No, I think I was fortunate that some people might say fortunate, others that know me might say unfortunate, but I'm a fairly strong character, and I tend to stand up for myself. I think there were some people, some police, that were caught up in things because it was difficult for them to break with the culture. But I think it's very easy to sit and look at the police as the only ones, doing things wrong. Like the point I make, and I'm not casting aspersions, but society was different in those days. Everyone, the values were different. The media knew what was going on. The courts knew what was going on. Everyone knew what was going on. And then when the Royal Commission came in, everyone stood back in shock, horror. How dare they do this? But I think there was, on reflection, people should all have a look at themselves. From my point of view, getting back to your question, I wasn't worried. I was ashamed of things that came out, and I would stoically defend the police and the work that detectives did, because I was fortunate to work with some great police officers. They had their integrity was never in question, and maybe for the grace of God go I, that if you're in the wrong place, wrong time. And I've learnt not to be judgmental. I had, as I referred to in the book, there was a person I worked with that, he was soliciting bribes from a brothel. And I was outraged when I found out about that. And, I wanted to extract revenge on him. But the wiser me now knows that, everyone can be tempted, and who am I to judge? And I actually saw him after he got out of jail, and I always thought that I'd throttle him if I saw him. But when I saw him, I just something changed in me, and I thought, well, you did the crime, you've done the time. We all need a opportunity for redemption. So
that idealism sort of breeds out of you as you get older, sometimes to an extent.
Yeah, I think it's the longer I stayed in policing, the more I realised it's not all black and white. And in every, I won't say every bad person, because I've come across some bad people that I'm not going to concede a millimetre. There's no goodness in them whatsoever. They're just pure evil. But in most bad people, there's some goodness, and in most good people, there's some badness. And that is something that I learnt through the years as a police officer.
One story that really stood out in the book was about a day a woman named Sharon called you. I don't think that's her real name, but she called you about her brother Isaac, who she thought had been engaged in some criminal activity.
Yeah.
What was that activity and what happened from there?
The circumstances were that this information was passed on to me, that a sister suspected her brother being involved in an armed hold-up, and she was worried about him and did the right thing, and she reached out to me. She knew me through a third party or whatever, and her main concern that was her brother, she expected him to be arrested but wouldn't be hurt. as circumstances played out, that I was talking to him when he was shot and killed by another police officer, and that's when I think I was probably 8 years into the job, roughly, and that's when I really felt about that's not what I joined the police for. And there was nothing done wrong. It was an operation that's when we're arresting violent offenders, split seconds decisions are made, and but to be talking to someone when they're shot and killed, it was rather confronting. And we don't have the services that are available to us in this day and age, because I don't think, not just the cops, people weren't aware of how to debrief from a situation like that. We had a psychologist come in and speak to us as a group and say, has anyone got a problem with this? I'd been involved in a police shooting shortly before that too, and given the fact that I was the one leading the investigation, I had a lot of problems with it, but cops being cops, I wasn't going to put my hand up. And then the advice we were given was the best thing you could do, and we're all sitting around in the room, and the best thing you could do is go home and train. And that was the best advice, but police being police, we went straight to the pub and got on the drink. And so with a belly full of beer, I was dealing with it that way, but when I got home that night, the ramifications sort of hit me, and I had it was a long night, and I felt like leaving the police the next day. I just felt so, I won't say ashamed, because we did nothing wrong, but that's not what I joined the police for. I didn't want to see people hurt like that, and it was really confronting. But yeah, I put myself together and walked in the next day and decided, okay, well, now I'm becoming a real cop, I can deal with this. And that's not diminishing the tragedy. Regardless of what he did, it was a sad situation, and it's something that hangs heavily.
What was that like, having to call Sharon and let her know what had happened?
It's obviously a call that you didn't want to make. I didn't expect. I phoned, and quite often in your role as a police officer, I phone people up knowing full well that they're going to vent at me, and I think that's part of your role, to allow people to vent at you. The intensity of what she said, I was shocked, even though I'd prepared myself for it, but I fully get it. I fully understand it, and it's one of those things that I'll still hold with me now, but I don't feel anything towards her as negative for what she said to me and how she said it, because I fully understand it. And I gave a commitment that no one would be hurt, and someone was killed. And
What made you decide to move into homicide? Because I imagine when you start as a police officer, there's a few different options, and you moved into detective work. And then homicide was something that you were particularly interested in. Why was that something you wanted to pursue?
It was the way a detective's career starts out. We start as a generalist detective, so we're working in local police stations and that. So you get a good cross-section of experience, different types of crime. And then you can head into major crime, which includes organised crime, the armed hold-up squad, and homicide. Homicide detectives were like mythical creatures in my mind at that stage. I think I was probably 6 months into the job, or maybe longer, before I actually saw someone. And someone walked in the police station and said, that guy's a homicide detective. And I thought, wow, how cool's that? And that was just me, naive and, just the wide-eyed, bushy-tailed. But whilst I was at a local area command, I got involved in a homicide investigation probably 4 years into my career, and the homicide team turned up, and I was just so impressed by their professionalism, their passion, which, that's one thing I say. If you're going to investigate a homicide, be passionate about it. Like, it's not a 9-to-5 job. But I could see these people were not only professional, they had their integrity, they were smart, and the work that they were doing, I can't think of a more worthy thing to be working on than someone's murder as a police officer. So that was my ambition, but you don't put your hand up and say, hey, I'm going to be a homicide detective. So I just sort of kept my nose down and kept working, and I got invited to the armed hold-up squad, and then went back to the LAC for a little bit, organised crime, and then got a tap on the back and for homicide, and that's when I found my sort of true passion.
3 missing children. 1 prime suspect, a botched police investigation. For 25 years, the otherwise beautiful little town of Bowraville in northern New South Wales has been haunted by 3 horrific murders committed within 5 months of each other. For the families, the Bowraville murders may be unsolved, but they're definitely not forgotten. Now there's fresh evidence and new hope that for the first time, the cases will be heard together as a serial murder trial. It's what the community has always wanted. And it's thanks largely to the patient, persistent work of one dedicated cop who won't stop until justice is served.
And people might know your name as associated with Bowraville.
Yep.
And Bowraville was, of course, the place where 3 children, 2 16-year-olds and a 4-year-old girl, were killed in one street. And you arrived there, and in the book you say that you arriving there was a moment when you felt ashamed to be Australian. Why was that?
Because no one cared. 3 kids, Evelyn, Clinton and Colleen, murdered over a 6-month period in a small country town that's inland of Nambucca Heads. They were Aboriginal children. They lived on a place that was referred to as a mission, which was on the outskirts of Bowraville. 3 kids had been killed. It was the early 90s. I was in major crime in the early 90s, and the family said to me when I first started speaking to them, and this was 95 because I came in, or 96 came in for the reinvestigation because the murders happened in 1991. And I came in and speaking to the families, and they just saw me as a white cop, and I got growled at a lot by the community. But when I sort of broke through those barriers, they said they told me that no one cared because we're Aboriginal, and I honestly didn't think we were a racist country. I didn't think we were a racist police force. Thought maybe we're a little bit ignorant, but that's the reality of it. And now 25 years down the track, having worked with the families closely over that 25 years, they were 100% right. If they were 3 white kids, it would have been dealt with differently. And a very telling moment for me was when Mr. Scipione, the commissioner, came up and apologised to the family. And that was 10 years in the making. And the family said, look, why can't someone at least acknowledge we should do something different, or should have done something different? And Mr. Scipione came up and acknowledged that, investigative opportunities were missed. We've learnt we could have done something different from that time. And that was a very telling moment. But there's been no one convicted of the murder of those 3 children, but one thing I take a little bit of comfort away is the fact that the families, and I'm not just talking about myself as a police officer, there was Jason Evers who worked with me on the investigation for 10 years, gave his heart and soul to it, and Bianca Commoner, a analyst that's worked on it for 10 years, and Jerry Bowden, the detective sergeant. They've given their all to that investigation like I've tried to, and I think the family appreciate they can see that people actually care, and that's made a difference. Amazing story in that they overturned the double jeopardy legislation, parliamentary inquiries. In fact, before I left the police, there was even a training film that I narrated about the way New South Wales police should deal with Indigenous communities, and that was on the back of a parliamentary recommendation. So progress was made, but I stand with the families, and whatever we can do, and I say we because I feel like I'm part of it now, still keeping an objective view on it because I was an investigator on it. But I don't think we should give up on that investigation. And I'm hoping very, very much the New South Wales Police haven't given up on the investigation.
What do you think the likelihood is that there'll ever be a conviction?
I never lose faith in something happening with that investigation. One of the elders, Auntie Elaine Walker, who passed away, who became a very close friend of mine, she said, Justice, Gary, will come in a way that no one expects it. This investigation has taken so many twists and turns. They've changed the landscape of the criminal justice system with the overturning of the double jeopardy. The last time it was before the court, they lost an appeal at the Supreme Court for the matters to proceed. But I'm not underestimating the families. They haven't given up. I saw them as recently as last week, and I know they're still very much focused on getting justice for their children. And it's not just the families. It's now the next generation. So the problem has passed on to generations, and that's sad, in a community. But the kids are now carrying their parents' grief and still pushing for getting some justice on that matter.
The other name that you've become synonymous with is William Tyrrell. And I think when you were brought on to sort of look into that case, there was a renewed sense of hope and energy because there was such despair that he hadn't been found and that we didn't know what had happened. When you took that over, did you have an instinct? Did you have any sort of preconceived idea about what you thought had happened?
Look, an instinct only takes you so far on an investigation. So I took that investigation over 5 months down the track. A lot of work had been done by the team that was running the investigation before I became involved in it. And one thing, and I got a sense when I actually went up to Benaroon Drive and had a look at it. It's a cul-de-sac, dead-end street in the outskirts of a town. And it's fairly obvious that someone with a connection to that area, it's not an area that you would drive through. Even if you were lost, you'd realise you're driving into a dead end. So someone with a connection. So in terms of instinct, that's what was driving me that I was looking at. I always look at opportunity, capability and motive when I'm looking for persons of interest in matters. So I ran that through the list of people that have been identified, and then we worked our way through it. But it was a difficult investigation, and obviously at the start, the police focus was on finding William, like the little boy lost scenario. But when it became abundantly clear that something untoward had happened, whether it was death by misadventure or whether someone had taken him, then it became more investigative focused. And my instinct is that someone has to have a connection to that area. I don't see it. It's not like a local park where someone might come looking for a child. Someone had to be there. Otherwise, it's a huge coincidence that two worlds have collided. A child that's for just a moment unsupervised and can be snatched. And that's the frustrating part about that investigation. How did this happen? And when you look at 3-year-old children disappearing, it doesn't happen a lot, and not that I know of across the Western world anyway, where I'm familiar with. Because I think a 3-year-old child you can't turn your back on the 3-year-old child, because they can get themselves into all sorts of trouble. And the family didn't turn their back on the child. It was just a momentary time when he stepped out of their view and he's disappeared. So it's a difficult one. But my instinct is it has to be someone that had a reason for being in the area, connected to the area, or a reason to be in the area.
And one name that came up was Bill Spedding.
Yes.
And he was being looked at because he was a repairman, and that was someone that was investigated and arrested. I'm interested to know what it's like to look into an area of inquiry like that, come up with what appeared to be sort of a dead end. Is there, I don't know if the word is guilt, but I imagine that you have to look at a few people and almost certain people's integrity or reputations almost have to be sacrificed in order to a means to an end, to an extent.
I understand what you're saying, and I'll answer the question on the basis I'm not talking specifically with Bill Spedding. I'm talking in a general sense, and not just William's matter, but other murder investigations that I've been involved in. It's not pretty. You've got to look. People don't walk in and hand themselves into a police station and say, I'm the person that, it has happened, but I haven't been fortunate enough to have that. They don't come in and hand themselves in. So you've got to look. And I make no apologies whatsoever for scrutinising an area when a child's disappeared. Now, bearing in mind with William's situation, I said it's not about William, but we'll just use this by way of analogy, that he disappeared. We didn't know whether William was alive or dead. And the police, things will get uncovered. And I make no apology for uncovering things, investigating a serious crime such as murder. So that's not saying I don't have any sympathy for people that might be damaged by the actions of the police trying to uncover a crime. But it's not done with reckless indifference. It's done with consideration and weighing up all the evidence and all the factors. So it's not something. I think there's a misconception that police, or I might even narrow it down to myself, that people might think I go in at a bull of the gate and just don't care what carnage I leave behind. That's not the case. Like it's never my intent to cause carnage, but I make a commitment when I was working on a team in homicide, when I'm leading a homicide, I make a commitment to do everything possible. Sometimes those things mightn't be comfortable with me, and I'm not talking about unlawful activities. I'm just saying asking the difficult questions, or getting in someone's face to find out what's happened. But that's your responsibility, and if you can't do that, do something else. That I firmly believe that, and in the circumstances that I've left the police, well, I've got an opinion, and my opinion is if you don't have passion in homicide investigations, well, you shouldn't be doing it. There's plenty of other work to do. And in saying that, and when I'm talking about my book, or I'm sitting here talking about me, I just want to make the point that major crime investigation is a team sport. There's a team that you work with, and I've been identified for a lot of the investigations, but with every investigation I've worked on or probably identified with, I'm working with a team. So that's important as well.
Do you have any regrets about the fact how the William Tyrrell investigation ended and how you left? Would you do it again, the way you did it?
Look, I must be the world's most stupid person. I've been convicted of a crime. Would you do it again? Oh, yeah, I'd do it again. I can only say this. If the circumstances presented themselves as they did when I made the decisions to, as the courts ruled, commit an offence by recording the conversation, with hindsight, no, but I didn't have the benefit of hindsight. And, it's an interpretation. I still maintain that this is why I recorded it, was to protect my lawful interests. My regret with the William Tyrrell matter, now that I've been sidelined from it, is that I didn't go harder. And, people think, well, you should have gone softer. No, a 3-year-old child's disappeared. We owe it. I just see myself as collateral damage to a tough investigation, but it's a price I'm prepared to pay if I'm trying to find out what's happened to a 3-year-old child. In saying that, it's not a price I wanted to pay. I want to be a homicide detective. That was my passion. I had the energy, I had the experience, and I wanted to stay doing that role. I still would have been doing that role to this day. But I couldn't live with myself if I put my own personal needs ahead of what the investigation needed. And at the time I made the decision to do what I did, it was not to further the investigation, it was to protect myself, but to allow me to go in and do what I needed to do.
And for listeners, in terms of what was done, it was legal for conversations to be recorded. It was just the device that it was being recorded on. It was a technicality, right?
Well, it depends which side of the fence you sit on. We can argue it's a technicality. I think just to break it down so everyone understands, on 4 conversations I recorded with one particular person. I don't need to mention his name, but there was a reason I was speaking to him about William's abduction. I was speaking to him on my own, which is unusual, but in the circumstances it was deemed the appropriate strategy so I could develop a rapport. On 3 of those conversations, there were lawful listening devices in place, recording this person's conversation anyway. And I'm only paraphrasing what's already played out in the court. And I don't want to usurp the authority of the court, but this is what was played out in court, that when I spoke to him, the listening devices weren't functioning all the time. I was concerned that there would be a malfunction whilst I was talking to him. It was going to be a pressure conversation to invoke a response, and I felt that I needed to record the conversations in case there was any allegations. The 4th charge, I was on holidays when the strategy that we're looking for, in that the person reached out to me, came into play. So I left my family holiday and went to his place on my own and recorded that conversation that was never played or listened to by anyone else until the investigation started against me.
Am I allowed to ask if you have a hunch about who did it?
You're allowed to.
Are you not allowed to answer?
No, look, I want to give respect to the coroner. The matter's before the coroner at the moment, and it would be inappropriate for me to offer opinions on that. The coroner's going through I would assume with a fine-tooth comb all the evidence that's been gathered by the police, and it's still an ongoing investigation. From a personal point of view, from a detective's point of view, you always have hunches, but I never act on I won't say act on my hunch, but you need more than a hunch to support a theory. A hunch might steer you towards a theory, but then you've got to gather the evidence in support of that. And that's when I would confidently say, I think this person is involved or that person is involved. But I think the public misunderstand too, or I'm assuming they might misunderstand. Part of our role as a detective is not just to find the person that's done it. I'm talking murder investigations here, but to exclude other possibilities. Because invariably when you charge someone with murder, you go to court and there's a lengthy trial, and any other hypothesis that might play out in that someone might suggest, oh, this person could have been the culprit or the offender, you've got to discount that as well. So there's a lot of inquiries that have to be done to strengthen the case with the person you're looking at. But I've always called them red flags. If I'm looking at a person, if the red flags present themselves, I follow that line down. That might either prove that the person's responsible or exclude the person from having any involvement. But
what do you think it is that makes you such a good detective? Do you think that you have instinct or perseverance, or have you always been a good problem solver? Like, what do you think it is that even just makes a good detective?
Well, to answer that, I'm not going to answer what makes me a good detective because there'll be other people that's got different views. But I'm comfortable in offering an opinion on what makes a good detective. Tenacity is something that I think you need. Like the harder the anyone can do an easy investigation. We call them the smoking gun murders, where the offender's virtually caught at the scene. That's easy. It's the difficult ones where your true mettle is tested as a detective, where the answer's not readily available. So you need that tenacity. You need passion, I think, to be a detective. It's not a 9-to-5 job, and I'm not just talking homicide. I'm talking any area. It's really, you've got to invest in the job. Other people might say, no, you've got to stay separate from it. I dispute that. I might be wrong, they might be right, but I think you've got to invest in it, and that will make you a better detective. But the thing that I do say, and people sort of look at me in shock when I say this, you need empathy. The people I speak to, they all understand it. They come across, and these are detectives I look up to, about the empathy. And by that I mean not judgmental, empathy for the victims, so you actually care for them. And, if you're going to investigate a homicide, you've got to be close to the victims. And that doesn't mean you're not professional. It doesn't mean you've got to do your job, but treat them the way you'd expect your family to be treated if they found themselves in those circumstances. But empathy also for the offender. And by that I mean everyone makes mistakes. Now, granted, when it's a murder, that's a very big mistake. But if you come across as judgmental, even with a witness or anyone, like judging someone on their lifestyle, that's going to bite you. And so I think empathy helps. So, break it down to passion, tenacity, empathy. Intelligence is another thing. Now, I don't put myself up there as a highly intelligent person, but I've got the emotional intelligence in regards to investigations. Let's say that I can understand the dynamics, the human dynamics of when something goes wrong, why did it go wrong? So I think all that comes together. But the other thing interesting about major crime investigation, and certainly when I've been running teams, I don't pick a whole team of people that mirror me or that. I like to get a group of people together with all a different skill set. Now, you'll need some detectives that are the ones that like kicking indoors, and they'll be the first one in the door. That's great. Some jobs you need that. Other jobs you need the cautious ones. You need that analytical mind. I always, because I think people would suggest I'm a risk taker when it comes to my professional life. And I'd like to have someone, a cautious person, working with me, because and I'm joking when I say this, but I might say, well, let's go arrest that person, and someone, the deep thinker, might put their hand up and say, hey, but boss, we've got no evidence. I go, good point. That type of thing. So you balance it out. So that combination makes for a great investigative team, all those skill sets coming together, working, getting that synergy working, and it's very rewarding. And some of the happiest times I've had in work is when I've been part of a team or got a good team together and we're going after the bad guys.
Gary worked at the coalface of crime. He wanted to catch bad guys, lock them up and give the victims much-needed answers. Gary knew how to use all the resources at his disposal, including the media. We feel that his success and high profile have embarrassed and upset a number of overambitious superiors who placed their own careers before the task they were sworn to do. These superiors have made one huge mistake. They have underestimated all of us. These charges aside, Gary is not just a huge loss to the New South Wales Police Force, but far more importantly to the victims with whom he interacts and also the people of New South Wales. Gary was instrumental in gaining information that led to the location of our murdered son's remains during the course of our coronial inquest. We could not conceive what it would be like to lose our go-to person during the course of that inquest. That is exactly what has been done to the families of little William Tyrrell, and that is bloody disgusting.
When you look back at your career, what are you most proud of? What's the thing that you're the most proud of in terms of your detective work and all the cases you've been involved in?
Look, I'd like to say I tried each investigation, and I'm proud of that now. Yeah, I'm not the best detective in the world or whatever, but I gave it 100%. But walking away from my career, especially in the circumstances that I have been, I didn't think I'd be walking up the steps of the court with cameras in my face as the offender or the accused. But when I got to the steps of the court and I looked around, I saw so many faces I knew from family members, victims that had helped, that came along to help me when I'm in trouble. That spoke volumes for me. And that's a moment, or on reflection, how would I like to be remembered is that a victim's detective, that the victims felt comfortable and entrusted me in sorting out their situation. So I've got no regrets in that regards. Obviously, I didn't want to leave the way I left, but yeah, all good things come to an end. Yeah.
And what does the next chapter look like?
I'm finding the world of journalism very daunting. It's interesting because people often think that police make a lot of ethical decisions, but I see a lot of ethical decisions in the world of journalism. I'm starting at the bottom run. I can see what where I want to get and what I want to do. I'm finding it stimulating. I still think it provides a vehicle for me to help people, which I like to do. It is a whole new world for me, but there are certain skills that I can take from being a detective and transfer them into the world of journalism. But I've always, I thought, had a good relationship with the media, and that I think it's very important, the role that the media plays in scrutinising the activities of not just the police, but making people accountable. And I've always supported the transparency in the justice system. So now to be part of that, it's also important to me to show that I'm not just a policeman. This is from a personal point of view, that I can survive outside the police. I stayed in the police because I chose to do that work. I enjoyed it. But take that away from me and I'll be able to follow something else. And I'm enjoying my work outside of the police. Occasionally when I see a crime come over the news, I'm thinking I'd love to get hold of that. I miss some of the friendships I had in the police and that environment. And sometimes I forget I'm not a policeman. That might become embarrassing at some stage. I hope I don't do anything stupid. But you've been a policeman as long as I do, you still think like a police officer. But look, the world of journalism is just as challenging. It's just a different area. So hopefully I can make a go of that.
Thank you so much for your time. We really appreciate it.
Cheers.
Gary Jubelin's book, I Catch Killers, The Life and Many Deaths of a Homicide Detective, is available to purchase online, at good bookstores, and via the link in the description of this episode. True Crime Conversations is a Mamma Mia podcast hosted by me, Jessie Stephens. Our producer is Hannah Bowman. If you'd like to find out more about the show, don't forget to join our online community. Just search for True Crime Conversations on Facebook and make a request to join. Thanks for listening to the best of True Crime Conversations 2020 with me, Jessie Stephens. Join me next week to hear my interview with investigative journalist Alan Clark about the 1988 death of Mark Haynes.